that's what we need to keep in mind, is look around. Because every system that is that high intensity has a dark shadow side. There's this whole talk about how important it is to be vulnerable in the modern day. Let yourself be vulnerable. No, that's just silly. Why would you do that to yourself? Just because the environment's intense, you don't have to be. So the thing I tell clients is, don't bring the circus unless people have bought a ticket to see the circus.
Hello coaches, welcome back to another Modern Soccer Coach interview. This week we are joined by Anthony McCann, who is an expert in burnout, ADHD and recovery. He's working with coaches, he's working with associations. Phenomenal expertise, you've got to check out his work. We're talking on World Mental Health Day. There's more awareness now than ever on mental health issues. But is there enough awareness about where it comes from? Is there enough awareness about how you manage it in an environment? Is there enough awareness around solutions? Anthony's outstanding. I hope you enjoy it. Please like, please subscribe, and please check out modernsoccercoach.com for more coaching resources. All right, here's Anthony. Enjoy.
Anthony, thanks so much for joining me today on the Modern Soccer Coach podcast. Really, really excited to chat.
Hello, Gary. How are you doing?
The first topic I want to get into is this element of burnout and coaching. We've done a podcast. We've looked at it from a coaching perspective. We've never looked at it. We've never looked at it from an expert's insight and basically get into the crux of it, which we're going to do today. But I'm going to kick this off with something that I literally saw a few minutes ago on LinkedIn, an article on their business articles, and it was about mental health in the workplace. Two things jumped out. One, 55% of employees feel that their bosses think that their mental health's better than what it is. So there's a misalignment with where people think they are in the workplace. But second of all, and this kind of struck me, and again, it probably won't surprise you as much, but 43% of people are worried that if they say they have an issue related to their mental health, that there might be repercussions. And I want to start it off there because sport and football in general has got to be the ultimate place where you are worried about saying something that could be construed as a weakness or maybe interpreted as, you're not on board. So first question for you is does this surprise you? And then followed by, how have we got to this place? Followed by, how do we fix it?
No, easily. Let's see. I think one of the things that comes to mind, first of all, was something I heard from a CAO of a hospital in London. And I was sharing a stage with them a few years back. And they were talking about how the average work lifespan of a CEO was 13 months. Right. So even at that level of leadership, the intensity of the workplaces that we're in at the moment leads to these deeply precarious employment conditions. Now, we know from football that that's just built into the system these days, even more than it ever was. Managers can barely survive 4 games on the trot without winning, without having their jobs being threatened. And players are also in a very precarious position, not only because of the high intensity leading to the possibility of injury very, very easily. I'm thinking about Allison this week. But also just there's this rotation of people that if you're not, it's like the first place I think of is Disneyland. I went to visit Disneyland and we got to look behind the scenes at how they operated things. If you don't get 10 out of 10 every single day as an entertainer at Disneyland, you're out. And it's becoming that way in a lot of these high performance professional athletic organizations as well. If you don't do 10 out of 10 every single time, well, somebody's going to take your place. That's what they call a competitive environment these days. Oh, you got to compete for your place, as some managers are saying at the moment. And that's not healthy. And I think one of the things that I really want to get across to people is that there are two things that the body really doesn't like doing, right? One is thinking. Right, so the body doesn't like thinking for an extended period of time, right? And that's fine when you're on a football pitch. It's good if you don't have to think very much. You feel better when you don't have to get in your head. But High intensity is the other one. Bodies don't like working at high intensity for an extended period of time. And that's just simply in terms of high intensity activity, high intensity exercise. If you are living a life where that is professionally what is obliged from you, then of course you're going to experience burnout. And the same goes for the general high intensity of the world that people are operating in, for the most part, in any professional athletic organization. Now, to come back to your first questions, does it surprise me that there's this lack of awareness from the top as to, what people perceive people are experiencing? Well, a lot of people are suffering, more so since lockdown in various parts of the world, all over the world. A lot of people are suffering, and the thing about any professional environment, emotions are not part of the accepted currency of that environment. Right? So if you come in with a mental health difficulty, it's not going to feel appropriate to you, first of all, to say anything. Right? So the leaders aren't going to expect you to say anything. If you don't say something, they're going to say they don't have the information and that they therefore cannot know and that they didn't know. But you coming in, the reason that you feel that there might be some negative repercussions if you do say something is, again, because emotions are not part of the currency of professional life. Now, there's a very good reason for that. That if you bring emotions into the currency of professional life, it makes everybody feel less safe, right? Because you're dealing with the practical, pragmatic situation on a day-to-day basis. And it's like any high-intensity environment. You don't want to start thinking about the internal stuff because you have to focus on the external stuff. And often in a very urgent way. So there are certain practicalities to not bringing in the emotional stuff. If you're saving somebody from a fire, you don't suddenly turn to your mate and say, how do you feel about how we were doing things this morning? It's important that you keep the focus outside the skin in order to help people in a high intensity environment. However, it doesn't mean that doesn't exist. So it's very, very important for there to be some facility within the life world of an organization that allows for places and spaces and moments where it is the currency. And I'm kind of a fairly straightforward fictional example. I'm just thinking Ted Lasso. You might have overdone it with the therapy sessions and the talking about Ted Lasso and the football club there. But that's the type of thing I'm talking about, where if it's overdone, it can actually damage the environment. But if it's done successfully, if it's done in a way which is enclosed and protected and allows people to feel safer within the environment while also not feeling like they have to be pariahs within the environment because they feel these emotions, the balance can be achieved, but it doesn't tend to be. Because people are trying to go higher, faster, stronger. People are trying to go more and more intense. And the more intense you make the environment, the less appropriate emotions are as a currency within that environment.
What a great start. What a great start. Very powerful. I often look back or sit back and think, how have we got to this? And I talk to a lot of coaches, and it seems to have dropped to youth levels, obviously with organization, and high school coaches and college coaches. And these are coaches that aren't in Old Trafford or aren't at the Emirates on a Sunday with 80,000 people. These are coaches that have 5 people at a game and that are feeling this. Like, is this an epidemic in coaching that you find that has gotten way worse over the last 5 years?
I don't think it's just coaching. I think it's people have written about the burnout society, quote unquote. And I think that's something which I've been tracing it going back to the 1450s, and the intensity of the environments we've been working in professionally have been increasing and increasing steadily since at least the 1450s in Europe. There was kind of a key point between 1450 and 1650 where things really, truly intensified in commerce and urban life and all these sorts of things. And we've been left with the legacy of that, which has just increased, and has really just exponentially increased in intensity in the last 50 years. And before that for 100 years, and then so on and so forth. But what we've got is, if you look at education, if you look at healthcare, if you look at football, if you look at anything, you only have to look at the newspapers to see, or they don't have newspapers anymore. You only have to look at online, feeling very old today, looking at all the between Highbury newspapers, that the whole question of the news cycle, you can track it across scouting, gymnastics, football, religion and the clergy, all these child abuse stories that are coming out. That's no accident, right? This is all symptomatic of that level of intensity that you put people in, and the type of people who get attracted to that intensity like moths to a flame. And that intensity is across the board. I started off as a linguist and became an educator and worked in universities for 20 years. And the universities I entered were very different to the universities I left. And now I've been very glad that I haven't been working in the kind of fairly classic formal university sector, because it's been getting more and more corporate. At one point, they started referring to students as clients and customers, and that whole commercialization of the whole sector just took off. But the same thing has happened in healthcare, and the same thing, this managerialism has come in and suffused the entire environment. So I think it is transsectoral. I think that football is one of those places where, because effectively it's sort of a performance and entertainment at the heart of it all, it's an entertainment sector, and it's the kind of place, again, which attracts deeply intense corporate personalities like moths to a flame. And we see this more and more with huge corporate buyouts of various clubs time and time again. It's a money pot. And it's and wherever you will find that amount of money flying around, now we're talking billions and billions compared to the Bobby Charlton days, still feeling very old, then you've got this, you've gone from the 50 quid a week, if you're lucky, right up to whatever we have now. It's just a stratosphere, it's past the stratosphere of what is there to limit the intensity. There's no limitation on the intensity anymore. It's just this huge pressure cooker in terms of what's happening on the ground. And I do wonder what's being done to protect the mental health of young kids coming through, men and women coming through to play professional football in these incredible pressure cookers, which are truly unreal once you start getting the wages that people are getting at the top. There's no reality to that. There's no way of gauging a real relationship between the work you do, the labor you do, the sweat you exude on a pitch, and the millions of dollars you get per year. There's no transactional logic to that. It's just makey-uppy money. So once it gets to makey-uppy money, we're talking about unreality. And when you're talking about unreality, you're talking about an incredible amount of intensity, an incredible amount of, speaking this week in a climate where there are storms going off everywhere, a kind of cultural climate which is susceptible to huge storms, in the same way that a real ecological climate is susceptible to huge storms. Whether it blows a manager off their perch, or whether it blows the owner of a club off their perch, or whether it blows a player into non-playing status for the rest of their lives, whatever it is, it's a storm-prone environment in which these huge boom and bust logics are in play. And it's what one sociologist used to talk about, Charles Perrow used to talk about, as normal accidents. That there are certain deeply intense environments in which these huge storms, these huge moments of disaster, become qualities of the environment. And that's something that then has to be handled on a day-to-day basis of this just huge boom and bust logic.
My dad's an accountant, or was a retired accountant, and he's very much on that. When you talk makey-uppy money, he thinks that that's enough to be like, if you're manager at X level, you're getting 2 million a year. You suck it up, you take your money, you play the game, and you move on to the next one. So you get enough money to retire, and you keep playing that. And I'm obviously a philosophy person, so I go the other way. I'm like, you couldn't pay me enough money to have abuse thrown my way like that for a week, never mind a year. Where do you sit with the, as you go up the ladder Like, how do they manage that? How do they manage that level of intensity? Is there a secret to it?
There can be. Sometimes it's just they're born with it. Some people are born with elephant skin, and some people are born with a deep integrity and elephant skin, both. And I think that it's again, I kind of look across to the political scene, and we both come from Northern Ireland. You come from Northern Ireland more than I come from Northern Ireland, but it's, as the accent will betray. But the one of the politicians in Northern Ireland that I always admired was John Hume, and he was very much involved in the civil rights movement in Northern Ireland, which built upon the civil rights movement in the United States. And John Hume was a very rare bird in Northern Irish politics, or any politics. He was trying to be an honest man for 40 years, 50 years as a politician before he succumbed to Alzheimer's later in life. And that's a very difficult thing to be. It's very difficult to have that level of integrity and authenticity and honesty in a world like politics. But in any world like that, which is that level of intensity and that level of public scrutiny and that level of now social media presentation, and it's the kind of place which changes you if you stay in it too long. And there's, to use just another very lateral reference, the TV show Angel, going back quite a few years, again, making myself feel very old. There was a quotation from, he's not in the best of favor these days, Joss Whedon's Angel, where Angel talks about a gypsy curse, which is a very cultural appropriative way to talk about this, but that's the way it's framed in the TV series, of be careful who you wish to be, for that is who you may, so be careful who you pretend to be, for that is who you may become. And that's something that I keep very close, is that idea, be careful who you pretend to be, for that is who you may become. And one of the biggest issues in all of the things that I work with on a daily basis is the issue of complicity. That saying you are an honest person with deeper integrity who abides by such and such values and deeply humane way of being in the world, if you are then working in an environment which is horrible and nasty and toxic, the difficulty is that, particularly for a lot of the people who would be involved in a scene like football, the environment you work in tends to be half of who you are. So who you think you are isn't all of who you are. The environment you're in is the other half. And you're in conversation with that, and that is shaping you and you are shaping it. But if the environment is toxic and you are trying to be not toxic, unless you're one of the people in charge who is actively changing that environment and it's your job, then the chances of you getting crushed are kind of high. You know, I'm talking from personal experience as well, of at least 2 places I've worked where there was sustained workplace bullying going on. So, you know, that's really, really important. And this is why when we're talking about organizations, it's really important that the organization, going back to your first point, that the leadership of organizations allows for a degree of organizational self-awareness and organizational situation awareness that keeps everybody included in the conversation and stays aware of the potentially unhelpful helpfulness. You know, the things where they say their intentions are good, but actually it's causing havoc. You know, and that's one of the things that's crucial in talking about burnout and talking about anything else, is this question of staying aware for our complicities in standard operating practice. Because the vast, and I found this in healthcare systems, the vast majority of standard operating practices in highly intense organizational systems tend to make things worse.
Hello coaches, we'll take a quick break here. Thank you so much for all your support with Modern Soccer Coach. We've got way over 45,000 subscribers now on the YouTube channel. The podcast has taken a new lease of life over the last 6 to 12 months, and it's all because of you and your support. Thank you so much for that support. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, and if you wouldn't mind recommending it or sharing it with your coaches. It really helps the channel grow. It means that we can put more content out. Every like, every subscription really helps. If you're listening to it on the iTunes or on Spotify, please continue to leave a rating. Please continue again to share it as well. Thank you so much. We will keep putting out more interviews. We've got some brilliant ones lined up. We really appreciate all the support. Again, please subscribe, and thanks again.
I want to go back to something you said a couple of hours, authenticity. I might be wrong in this, but I think being authentic and being your true self is something that you're talking in every day, and you keeps you in a good spot, or at least lets you believe that you're moving at the values that you say you believe in, or trust that you believe in. But authenticity, when you go to Ted Lasso, and this is an argument I have a lot with my wife, who doesn't do any sport, but loves Ted Lasso, and says, well, you just go in and be Ted Lasso, you'll be fine. And I'm like, the problem is, like, I'm not Ted Lasso. Ted Lasso is a personality that doesn't know anything about soccer. So sometimes you want to go in, there's different leadership styles, there's different coaching styles, but sometimes being authentic is being introverted in a way. And yet there's a mask that you have to have as a coach, where you do have to be, well, being the leader, you have to get everyone going. There is that piece. Villas-Boas has a great quote about, it's just about putting a mask on every day. And I looked at that years ago and thought it was a brilliant quote. And now I look at it and think it's quite a sad quote, because surely if you do that every day and you still get hammered, that's gonna eat you up. I guess my question is, how do you balance basically the act of a leader having to act in certain ways and be high energetic, but then also how do you let your true self out at a level that isn't going to be detrimental to, well, what if nobody likes my true self? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'll start with Ted Lasso, because I could talk for hours about Ted Lasso, but the Ted Lasso situation is not real life. It's a fictional narrative that is designed with a very specific purpose. And it's very, very clear that Ted Lasso occupies the position of the fool, the jester, the child in the Emperor's New Clothes. Right? He's the foil. He's the foil against which all the other stuff is highlighted. And it's really important that he hasn't a clue what's going on. And it's kind of it's really important that he has this heart of innocence that gets crushed. That's if you stay past the first season, the point of Ted Lasso is it won't work if he stays. He has to leave or he will get crushed. He doesn't have the heart for it. He doesn't have the adaptation. He doesn't have the mask. And that's what I train people in. I train people to mask, not in a negative way. I used to think that not masking was the key to things, and I got crushed. I was the Ted Lasso, I went, oh, we can change this, we can change that. Do you not think of doing this? Could you not think of doing that? And I'm currently watching New Amsterdam, which has a similar feel to it, but is also based on a real life situation. I depress myself with my television watching. So that's really, really important with the people I work with. Is what I say to them is, okay, well, the people I work with are very distinctively people who value their own sense of authenticity. They are people who have a deep sense of a helpfulness instinct, which never switches off. So they throw themselves against the wall with this authenticity drive, right? And they hope that it sticks. And if it doesn't stick, they just keep throwing themselves at the wall, right? And then they feel like they don't belong if they keep falling off the wall. So what I say to people is, okay, first of all, work out, do you want to be there and or need to be there? Okay, if you don't want to be there and or need to be there and or have no choice in being there, which for some people is a real thing, then you're either leaving or you're staying, right? If you don't want to be there and or need to be there, get out, right? If you have a choice. If you're staying, then authenticity isn't just throwing yourself at the wall. Half of authenticity is adapting to feel safer when you feel less safe. So if you are walking through a field of rattlesnakes, you don't go out in bare feet and shorts. You wear good high boots and you tie your trousers up with a piece of twine and you proceed. If you're going into a biohazard lab, you wear a hazmat suit. If your job is to look after disposing bombs, then you wear a bomb disposal suit as you walk towards the bomb that you're trying to dispose. If your body feels the intensity of the environment you're going into, why would you just let it be vulnerable? And there's this whole talk, particularly coming from self-help scenes in the United States, there's this whole talk about how important it is to be vulnerable in the modern day. Let yourself be vulnerable. No, sorry, right? That's just silly. Why would you do that to yourself? That's self-harm in an environment of high intensity. It doesn't matter whether it's positive intensity or negative intensity. It's high intensity. Your body doesn't like feeling high intensity for a regular, for an extended period of time, unless you are also adapting to feel safer. And even then, even if you're on the battlefield, you're withdrawn after 60 days, right? You can't sustain it. So that's with armor. And there are certain ways we can think about what our bodies are able to cope with in terms of high intensity in a very simple way. The average time for a cinematic movie, feature movie, for about 40, 50 years was 1 hour and 25 minutes. The average amount of time for a religious service that wasn't a big, happy, clappy all day thing, the average amount of time for a religious service would have been between about 50 minutes and an hour and a half. Right? That's about the time that our bodies can cope with that level of high intensity. How long is a football match? About the same, and with a break in the middle. Right? Our bodies can't cope with that level of intensity for much longer than that at a time. So when we are working in environments that may not seem like that level of intensity, because you're not having people jumping around all the time, but are still at that level of intensity, where people don't get a break from being on all the time, then our bodies are just getting worn down to bare threads, or bare skeletons, perhaps. So our bodies get into the way of feeling like we aren't adapting, we're too vulnerable, becomes a constant scream of our bodies. And surprise, surprise, you get inflammation where you weren't expecting inflammation. You get, brain fog where you weren't expecting brain fog. You're losing attention all over the place. You're getting distracted. All these things that I deal with in the ADHD world. But, those are things that happen when your body is feeling overwhelmed and scared and unsafe and unprotected. So when it comes to masking, people talk about masking as this negative thing that people do when they subconsciously have to, protect themselves in an environment that's too much. Well, you can also mask intentionally. Actors do it all the time, right? So they go on stage, they mask as the actor, and then they take the mask off. If they want to be healthy, they take the mask off when they come off the stage. Lots of people mask professionally, and it's their way of helping themselves because they know that the intensity is too high on the professional stage. So when you come off, you let it down. One of the people that fascinates me at the moment is Messi. And I'm not going to go into the complicity conversation because that's a whole other political cauldron and can of worms. But in terms of the intensity and the energy management that he keeps going on the pitch, there's a genius to the way in which he plays now as an older player, where he more or less walks around the pitch all the time. And then has these little tiny bursts of energy in which he does something for 2 or 3 seconds and he walks again. Right? And going back to the Clough Jr. back in the day, he used to do that and get laughed at for not putting enough energy into the football pitch. Or Matt Letizia did it as well. They used to get laughed at. He was Southampton. Used to get laughed at for reducing their energy use on the pitch. But they knew that the intensity of the game meant that if they were going to bring their top intensity at certain times, certain moments, they would have to reduce their intensity at all other moments. And that's genius. But it doesn't look like genius because people expect all go all of the time on the pitch, off the pitch, on the pitch, off the pitch. That's not sustainable.
Staying on Ted Lasso then, say Ted Lasso, Pep Guardiola, have they done more damage than good because they've created a persona? Pep's created obviously a persona of how football should be played. That's helped the game and advanced the game, but also hindered every other coach who's going to put down a cone for the rest of their life. No one can get near that. But I also feel that maybe Ted Lasso has created a certain aspect of it's not attainable either. So
it's fiction. It's fiction. And I think people
Yeah.
forget that it's fiction. And I think it's fiction trying to make a point. And I don't see that much difference between Ted Lasso and Mighty Ducks, to be honest. You know?
Anthony, I think bosses who are like you and I can laugh and it's we know what it is, but if you're it is an inexperienced boss leader thinks that it's the new type of leadership. You see the stickers on the door, and obviously there's a commercial movement behind that as well. But what if there's a pressure in the environment to act a certain way? Does this go back to your get out if you can? But like, what if you've got bills to pay? Like what?
Yeah, this gets down
where
to
do you find yourself there?
It's against the want. Do you want to be there? Do you need to be there? Do you have any choice in being there? I've been at times in my life where I didn't have any choice in being there.
Yeah.
And I dialed my personality down to 0, walked in the door, waited till the day was over, and then dialed it back up again and walked out. It's like there were times you got to do what you got to do to put food on the table to feed your family. It's what you do. This American dream that you can have whatever you want. Well, first of all, it's deeply ableist, coming from a disability household. It's deeply ableist. Not everybody can do what they want. And a lot of the people who can do what they want or think they can create and manifest their realities in these high intensity environments, they're usually people that, if you look a bit harder, have these deep immune defense things going on in the background of their physiology that they aren't aware of, that are driving them to be these super energetic, overblown personalities, and yeah, you can survive like that for a period of time because that high intensity environment is built for these super overcompensating high intensity physiologies. But for people like me who are a little bit on what you were saying about the interiorizing kind of people like me who are more thinky, even if my body doesn't like it, that I kind of think the difference between Pep Guardiola and Ten Hag, for example, at the moment, that I knew before he came in that Ten Hag was going to have problems in Manchester United because he's coming from Holland, where they've got the Netherlands have a very, very high cognitive approach to everything. And he clearly has a more controlled physical way about him. And he's going into an environment full of very overblown personalities, big personalities, big egos, big people. And I knew from the start there were going to be personality clashes. And it happened within days, almost. And that's the thing, is that, when we come down to the level of personality differences, that's where coaching in a football terms becomes fascinating to me. Like Ten Hag is not going to be coming along and slapping his players on the bum, which is what Pep Guardiola does to Haaland, right? For example, that's not going to happen because that would be inappropriate for him to feel like he was going to do that. That would be an unprofessional thing probably for him to do. So there are certain personalities that almost fetishize a deep collegial family style relationship with their players. There are certain players who find that deeply inappropriate. And that's where the dynamics of a club and the dynamics of an organization become really, really interesting, because there isn't a one size fits all for these types of ways of doing things. And with something like Ted Lasso, where he kind of makes it into this family dynamic and you get everybody sharing and being all emotional, and that can be deeply damaging to an organizational structure. And there's also, when I was teaching at University of California, I came up with this idea of grenade teaching, which was based on my own mistakes. And grenade teaching is where you do this deeply emotional thing, and you evoke this deeply emotional response from the people you're with, and with my students, for example, and then you leave. And the next person who comes in doesn't do that. And what you've done is you've exploded a grenade and left them with all these big expectations about emotions and openness and vulnerability. And the next person comes in and that's not what they do. And suddenly it's a mess. So one of the things I committed myself to do was not do grenade teaching or not do grenade coaching. If you're going to work with someone to open them up with big questions, you do it slowly and you do it carefully and you do it within a controlled environment, because expecting everybody to be part of this deeply emotional family environment with that level of high intensity, well, you're either going to get a cult or the mafia, one or the other. And that's where it becomes very, very difficult in an environment where there is a high turnover of staff. So the next people coming in are going to have to start almost from scratch, as well as deprogramming everybody who still is lingering on.
Mm-hmm. I was actually at a college game at the weekend, football, first ever big football game, and it blew my mind. But obviously from a business standpoint, 55,000 people, there's so many different angles, but also from a messaging standpoint, very interesting how, you had your community service work, you had your academic excellence, you had every box was being ticked, but then you're not really getting much diversity of thought here. It's going to be packaged in the next state the exact same way. So I wonder if that's a really productive model for, future leaders.
Well, it's also then sold as thought leadership.
Yes.
As well.
Yes.
Which is the phrase that people use, and they're thought leaders, and so the people with big ideas who create these, big projects and big campaigns and big organizations and big teams, they come through, and they're again usually these deep overcompensating, extending personalities, but they come through and they present this campaign style thought leadership as critical thinking. And then if anybody comes along and critiques it, it's like, oh God, what are they doing? Get them out of here.
Yeah.
So you end up with a classic charismatic institution. And it's effectively where you have the charismatic leader, to use Max Weber's sociology, central leader in the middle, and then there's a circle of uncritical voices around. Now it's a classic thing you get in a lot of celebrity stuff as well, where you might have a central famous singer in the middle and they get surrounded by their yes people, and then you get the movies where the person surrounded by yes people wants to feel authentic for the first time in their life, and they go off and find some ordinary person they can slum with, But that's what happens. You get these charismatic institutions where the central charismatic individual who charms lots of people and entrances people with their vision for the future as enacted in the present, often with a history of performance, often with a history of athletic prowess or whatever it is, because again, that deep, big personality helps with that stuff. But then they come along and they create these environments which are uncritical spaces. They don't allow for open conversation. They don't allow for people to challenge, because the point of the structure is to diminish or exclude any challenge whatsoever. And that's deeply detrimental to performance on the pitch, quite frankly, because it means that the lack of authenticity and the lack of room for autonomy trickles down, and that really tends to trickle down into certain leadership styles as coaches, sports coaches, where, do you have the more do it my way approach, or do you have it kind of create the structure so that players can adapt and learn within it so that they can find their own way, and surprise, surprise, guess which one tends to be the one that wins out in these deeply conservative, really truly conservative structures where critical thinking isn't allowed,
Yeah. God, there's so many layers to it. As a director of a coach, or if you're at a club and you're a director of coaching, overseeing 5, 6, 7 coaches on a daily basis, how would you advise that leader to look at the needs of the state of where they're at, how to check in and kind of be genuine about it? Do they need to do that, or what's your thoughts on that?
It really depends on the specifics of the circumstance to start with, because you got to work out what the baseline is. You've got to work out where people are starting from. Again, because there's no one size fits all. If a situation can be intense, can be very intense, and be very successful, if you have the right adaptations to protect people's sensitivities and to conserve people's energy and to allow people their boxes and lanes and clear kind of standard protocol stuff for dealing with high risk situations, if you treat it like almost like a military structure, then really high intensity situations can work quite well. If, however, you have a situation that is too low intensity, that can cause its own problems too. Then it gets lax, that people don't look after each other. Then people kind of get too lackadaisical about protocol and about the need for structure. And then you get the tyranny of structurelessness, as some people talk about, and that's just really, really, it depends so much on what's actually going on to start with. Leadership isn't one thing. Leadership is about enhancing the environment that you have in front of you. And helping other people to work towards that enhancement. And the thing is, for a lot of men in particular, their instinct simply says that to enhance an environment, you should intensify it. Now, that's an immature approach. When you've eventually become older, you learn that actually intensifying is the default and de-escalating might enhance it first. And de-escalation is not something that comes naturally to me. It's something I have to work really hard at. And I discovered this when I worked in special needs education as an assistant, where I was going in and I was, just by default, I was getting all the kids in the class all hyped up because I was having fun with them and escalating them. And I was just brought over to the side and said, "You're not helping. These kids are getting wound up and they're going to be out of control by 2:00 in the afternoon. You need to, calm it down a bit." This is before I got diagnosed with ADHD. But like that's the thing, is that like the very masculine tendency to escalate and escalate and escalate is driving managerialism, is driving kind of corporate development, is driving a lot of coaching philosophy. And that higher, faster, stronger ethic that's now built into the Olympics and built into athletics generally, it's not sustainable either in terms of physical bodies or in terms of developing human relationships with each other. It's impossible. It is entirely possible to do anything to a high level of excellence, but if you stay up in that zone all day, every day, it is going to kill you or somebody beside you. And that's what we're talking about. It's really serious life or death stuff.
Well, but some people do stay there for 5, 10, 20 years. Like, how do they self-medicate? And what do they do to?
Well, sometimes it's because they create structures of deep privilege around themselves. So that they get up there and then they have enough money or enough wherewithal to create these safety structures around them that make them feel safe, but likely make a lot of other people around them feel very unsafe, right? That's one way people do it. Another way is people start with that deep privilege. Some people, like particularly if you look at the acting scene, where people start in these really well-off upbringings and then they step sideways into the acting profession and they're able to stay there because they're well off to begin with. So there are certain, socioeconomic privileges that people can bring to that. Sometimes people just have that extra, that extended physiological explosiveness built into their system. But again, that's going to have payoff somewhere else. If they are doing well, there's going to be payoff somewhere else. It spills out. That spills out all over the place. So I just started watching the documentary about the 5 basketball players and LeBron and various other ones.
Oh yeah,
on streaming, and that's a very much a bubble kind of environment. Once you reach that level, you're already in the place of privilege. It's like I was watching the Conor McGregor stuff as well. That you can work your way, as McGregor did, you can work your way up to that with bloody hard work if you have all the things that are already privileged to fall into place to allow you to be the type of body and the type of personality that will fit in that environment. Chances are, if you are the type of body that fits in that environment with all that hard work, to get you there, you probably wouldn't have fit in many other environments, to be honest. So it's kind of the little people used to talk about, used to maybe still do, talked about universities as shelters for autism, which wasn't meant to be anything offensive or insulting. It was just that because there was so much ability to be intense in university environments, staff were often drawn from neurodiverse populations because they just shoved themselves in their office and did their special interest for so long, and the way they went. And there are also particular personality types that fit these high intensity athletic places and positionings. And we know in the real world, when you look around is the important thing. You know, if you've got a single energy point of a person in the middle, take a look around. What is happening to the people around them? What is happening to all that huge percentage of kids that get discarded from the academy system? Right? All of those kind of the detritus of this high intensity, every high intensity environment has a huge amount of detritus to it, right? Waste product. Now, one way to look at that is to look at the culture world design, or world culture design, from the cinema industries, creative industries. In the Lord of the Rings, when the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings movies were created, 95% of all creative work that was done to create the world of Middle-earth, 95% of it ended up in the bin. Right? And that's pretty standard for a high-intensity environment. 95% of most of what is needed for the environment to sustain itself and to prove that and justify its existence gets discarded. Now, that's about the same percentage of youngsters that get discarded from the academy system. And that's what we need to keep in mind, is look around. You know, because every system that is that high intensity has a dark shadow side. And that's where it's important to keep an eye, and especially when it comes to complicity, we were talking about earlier, to keep an eye to those complicities, to not allow that lack of self-awareness, to not allow that lack of situational awareness to creep in too much. And if you do notice things, if you can find an appropriate place to do it, speak up, or get yourself into a place where you can make a difference. Because that's another difficulty, is if you are not in a position where it's your job to make a difference, then you're not really going to make a difference in those environments. So the thing I tell clients is, don't bring the circus unless people have bought a ticket to see the circus. You know, because the likes of the people I work with can bring the circus all the time. It's like, oh, we could improve that, and we could do that, and we could do the other, and we could help there, and we could help this. You know, if you bring that to someone who didn't ask for your help, what is it, the old Buddhist maxim of, if you do not speak to those who are willing to listen, your words will be poison.
Wow.
Is the idea. You know, and that's the thing, is that if it's not your job to make a helpful structural difference to the environment you're in, it's not your job. And you're going to be told to go away, or worse.
But yeah, your vulnerability, talked about vulnerability, that's the dangerous vulnerability, is like, all right, I'm going to say an opinion that nobody's going to agree with and put a mark on your back that you'll be out the door in 2 weeks.
Well, the thing is, it comes back to do you want to be there and or need to be there?
Need to, yeah.
And if you are staying, then if you want to work your way up through the system to get to a point where you can make a structural change, first of all, it's going to take time and patience. A whole lot of time. That's where you got to remember that your only job as you rise through the ranks is to provide a safe pair of hands. Your job is to not make other people feel unsafe around you. And as you rise, you also have to be aware that each promotion means you get less autonomy to do what you do. So it's kind of weird. You cross over to getting more autonomy for the first promotion, then you get less autonomy than you started with, and then you get a little bit more autonomy in a small niche way for the next promotion, and then you get shifted up to even less autonomy again. So by the time you're up at the very top, you're in the least autonomous position, because the person at the top needs to be surrounded by people who don't challenge them. So it's a very strange thing where you have to almost dial your personality down as you go up through the system, because you need to be safer and safer and safer as a pair of hands as you go up the system. Now, if you're coming in from outside as a celebrity manager or celebrity player, whatever it is, you know, you might get a certain amount of leeway. But even Ronaldo coming into Manchester United at the end of the day, you know, he was coming into a system where he was trying to do his whole fully autonomous thing. All they wanted was a safe pair of hands, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, this is the thing. At these high intensities, a safe pair of hands invites deeply conservative ways of doing things in an environment where they're saying they want these explosive players. But in fact, the explosive players don't fit within the safer ways of doing things. You know, occasionally you get these wonderful players like this week, Iniesta, who can be both an incredibly safe pair of hands and incredibly creative at the same time. And that's genius.
Genius. But very rare.
Very, very rare. But it's like, or Buffon being another one. It's like these players who just can do both.
Yeah. The functional piece and the artist, the entertainer. It's usually we're all functional basically, and the artist.
It's a job.
Yeah.
It's a job. It's a gig. You know.
Yeah.
And I think when people remember that it's a gig, they can respect that it's a gig. And that's important. Saying it's a gig doesn't denigrate it. You know, I love playing music on stage. That's a gig, right? But you can respect the gig and still be a safe pair of hands. You know, like it's something that took me a long time to learn, that when you get up on a musical stage, if you are completely unpredictable, people don't have a good time. You know, unless they were there for a, you know, Dada surrealist concert, you know.
Yeah.
But if for a standard gig, you know, you got to give them what they want, you know, and you got to provide them with a large degree of predictability, you know, and then occasionally have these little moments of unpredictability. But most football is deeply predictable.
Oh, majority of it is. Most of it's mundane and boring. We don't want to admit that.
But there's nothing wrong with it being predictable. Like, the predictable is comforting. Like, it provides a safe performance for the people who are watching. Like, if you're watching tennis, you know, you like that the first 70% of every game of tennis is totally predictable. And then you have the, oh my God, that was a great shot. And then the person adapts and they get up and get thinky and, you know, adapt. And that's the exciting bit. It's like, yeah, you know, I thought it was going to be predictable. But the problem is when the people watching it, whether the people at home or the people by the pitch, when the people, or the players on the pitch, even worse, when they get numb by that. And that's the thing, is you can stay alert and still, you know, that the training allows you to do the predictable and not get bored, because then you don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
You know, the training allows you to work in the high intensity and not have to get intense yourself. And that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to make sure that you don't bring the high intensity to the environment. And one of the things I talk to clients about is, you know, listen to yourself, listen to your situation, and make a clear distinction between the two. You know, just because the environment's intense, you don't have to be, you know, and the more training you do, the more predictability you bring to anything you do, the less intensity you're going to bring to it yourself. And that's where you start getting into the zones of optimal functioning and the, you know, different arousal states of different players and things like that. But for the most part, you know, you're trying to work in high intensity, and also it's about being a safe pair of hands for yourselves, but being a less safe group of people for the other team. You're trying to make the other team unsafe. You're trying to make them feel less safe in the company of you, you know, so whether you're pressuring them when they have the ball, or whether you're running towards them with the ball, or, you know, going into unusual places when they're running backwards, whatever it is, you're trying to make them feel more unsafe, because if they feel more unsafe, they feel more intense internally. If they feel more intense internally, their situational awareness and self-awareness will decline, and they will start making mistakes. And it's basic battle strategy, as you'd get on a war field as well. You know, it's just like, how do you be predictable enough that they get complacent, and unpredictable enough that you make them feel unsafe so they make mistakes? And there's a logic to that has always made sense. Where it becomes more complicated is you can do it without any budget. In the same way that you can teach a university course in a room with no university, simply by having a conversation with no resources other than having people in a room. It is possible to do it. People have been educating people through conversations for millennia, right? You don't need these huge budgets to have a decent learning environment. In the same way, you can play football out the back on a field, slipping on the cowpats, as I remember very well. And, I'm sure you had cowpats in Oma too, Gary. So, that's the basic of what we're talking about. That's the foundation of all of this, is we can play football without the huge industrial complex, right? Or military industrial complex, perhaps. We can play football without that. So the magic of football is at the heart of that. The magic of that balance of structure and flexibility and stability and safety and unsafety, and occasionally getting people of genius who can,
sets us up nicely, Anthony. I haven't even got to 50%. We haven't even touched ADHD. Could we get a part 2 set up in the future? Finish this off?
No worries at all.
Thanks, Anthony. Appreciate it. I'll see you in a wee bit.